Hi, this is Jackie of Alchemical Cosplay, and you're watching my video tutorial for quilted petticoats. This petticoat uses a few historic techniques to add volume. It has a corded edge, as well as a ruffle on the bottom hem, and quilting with a natural cotton batting. I used a silk on the exterior and a soft cotton lawn for the lining. Decorative and quilting stitches in contrast thread make a beautiful and functional undergarment. The very first thing I did for this project was calculate the ruffle ratio to determine how gathered I wanted that bottom ruffle to be. So here I'm using scraps of the actual quality fabric and lining, and I've marked out 15 inches and ran 3 rows of basting stitches along the top edge of this fabric. Then you grab just the bobbin threads. Grabbing the bobbin threads makes it a little easier to gather. You can easily push your fabric down along to create the ruffle. When you've gathered it to something that looks good and you like, I liked it about this full, I measured it again between those 2 marks I had before and saw how far down it had gathered. So my original marks were 15 inches apart, and now they're 3, so that makes a 1:5 gather ratio. Using this ratio, I cut pieces of fabric that were 5 times longer than the hem of my skirt. There is 1 piece of shell material and 1 of the cotton lining. They are sewn together along the long edge, then understitched, and a decorative floral stitch was added along the bottom edge. Pfaff's Performance Icon machine has a wonderful array of decorative stitches that I used throughout this project. Now you go ahead and run 3 rows of basting stitches along the top edge of your ruffle. This is what it will look like when you're done. The top row should be in your seam allowance and the other 2 rows about 3/8 of an inch apart. To make sure your gathers are evenly distributed around the ruffle, clip the top edge of your fabric at the front, back, and sides. Then match these up with the notches on your skirt bottom so your ruffle is not lopsided. Carefully pull on all 3 rows of thread together and scoot your fabric along to gather it. Be very careful you don't break your threads. This causes a big headache and makes you have to re-sew the basting stitches. Once your ruffle is fully gathered, it's time to pin it to the body of your skirt. So here I've got the shell and the batting layer laid out together. These are just pin basted together so they don't shift around while I'm working with it. Then you match the notches at the front, back, and side seams. And don't worry if your ruffle is a little too loose or too tight at this point. Now you can distribute the gathers between your notches to make sure it lays flat with the hem of your skirt. Once it lays flat, go ahead and pin all the way around. Here I have laid my cotton lining on as well, sandwiching the ruffle between these 2 layers. I like to pin the body to the ruffle first so I can see what I'm doing, and then the lining goes on really easily. So you sew through all these layers, right sides together, matching the lining side of the ruffle to the lining side of the skirt, and vice versa. With the layers turned right side out, it's starting to look like a skirt. So I've pushed back the lining and given this a press, and now I'm going to run a decorative top stitching right along the edge between the ruffle and the body of the skirt. This keeps the seam allowances flat, will give a good edge for the cording to be laid on top of, and I used a nice honeycomb decorative stitch here for some added visual interest. The cotton cording I found in the upholstery section of my local fabric store. You just go ahead and slide it down between the lining and batting layers, and by using the zipper foot and quilting guide, You trap the rows of cording between a straight stitch to form your cording channels. The zipper foot lets you get really close to that cording, and the quilting guide makes sure that each of your channels is straight and even. I added another row of honeycomb stitch at the top to balance things out. Next, it's time to get quilting. Here I'm setting up the performance icon for free motion quilting. The icon gives you a little to-do list, which includes switching the needle bed plate, making sure your stitch width safety is on, and your dynamic spring foot is attached. The spring motion foot and straight needle bed plate ensure you will have precise stitches while free motion quilting. To transfer the quilting design onto the skirt, I made a simple template by printing it onto copy paper, reinforcing the back with painter's tape, and cutting areas that I wanted to trace. Then I used a disappearing ink pen to trace around the general outlines of the design. It is not the full design, but free motion quilting is more of an art than a science anyway. So that's what the transfer looks like before I started to quilt. Making sure all layers of your fabric are smooth and where they're supposed to be, you move your fabric with both hands underneath the needle, and the motion of you pushing the fabric is what creates the stitches. Because the feed dogs on the machine are down when free motion quilting, it is up to you to move the fabric in the direction you want and to keep moving at roughly the same speed so your stitches are the same size and an even tension. I don't mind admitting that I found this very tricky to get the hang of, but the performance icon did an excellent job helping me maintain my stitch length and tension, even though I'm a beginner free motion quilter and my stitching didn't always go exactly where I intended it to. In order to reduce bulk at the top edge and allow the fabric to gather more densely into the waistband, I removed the silk shell and cotton batting from the top 5 inches of the skirt and replaced it with another layer of cotton lawn. So here I'm joining the lawn to the silken batting, and then I pressed it wrong sides together, and I'm just top stitching through all layers. And in order to form the opening at the back of the skirt, I decided to just open up the back seams right along the stitch line and sew them back together. So here I'm ripping open that seam, pinning the edges together, removing all the loose threads, and I'm going to top stitch along this opening. Make sure to backstitch across the bottom edge of this V shape, as it will get the most strain when you're opening and closing the skirt. Now it's time for more rows of basting stitches. As you did with the ruffle, run 3 rows of basting stitches along the top edge of your skirt. Then it's back to quilting. This time I did the geometric section by using the quilting guide attached to my foot to keep my rows of stitching even to make a tidy geometric shape. I just set it for 1 inch apart. I drew on the first lines as a guide with my disappearing pen, and then with the quilting guide just followed each row of stitching down along, and then did that again and again and again and again until the skirt was quilted. Yay, finally, quilting's all done. So all that's left is to attach the waistband and the button, and you're ready to wear your petticoat. Here you can see I've gathered the top edge of the skirt just in the same way I did the ruffle, and then I've got the waistband piece pinned to it. The waistband has a little bit of lightweight fusible interfacing just to give it a little bit more body, and I'm sewing the right sides together along the top edge of the skirt with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I didn't show it, but what I did next was to fold and press under the 1/2 inch seam allowance on the other side of the waistband, and then folded the waistband over and pinned the open side of the waistband right along the seam we just sewed. Then top stitch 1/8 the way to catch all layers and to close the back side of the waistband. I then attached the Pfaff Sensormatic buttonhole foot and created a lovely little buttonhole with just the push of a button. Then you just have to attach the button of your choice to the other side of the waistband and your petticoat is done.